Now it's been entrusted to us to do what needs to be done, and there's constant battles that go on, and that's where with Mark's effort, he mentioned that I care about this very, very deeply. I want to help you in any way that I can. My family moved to Florida pretty much, and my sister is of the opinion. She says there's only two kinds of people who live in Florida and people who wish they did. And so we were at her house in Boca Raton, and my brother, who was a very successful chiropractic physician there in Boca, we were around. It was Thanksgiving, and so it was Wednesday afternoon before the courthouse was to close at 4 o'clock, and to be closed on Thanksgiving and Friday and Saturday and Sunday, would not open until 9 o'clock on Monday. And so her professional, my sister-in-law's professional attorney, knew how to do this, and so he flew down from New York. And as we're standing around with my parents in their late 70s who had come down from Ohio, and all the families gathered around, my dear brother got broadsided with something that he never ever anticipated. He had a wife who he gave everything, and when she would demand a little bit more, he'd give her more. And he was of the opinion that scripturally, if he just supplied and did everything and was loving and give, that would all be required. And so she lived in a place, Boca Raton, Florida, in a gorgeous home, and had 3 mink coats, had a Corvette, had personal clean up the house and maid service 3 days a week, had everything a person could want. And yet he's all standing there, and the police show up, and they handcuff my brother, and they take him off for molesting his children, who were age 11 and 13. Now, what's worse than that is that Boca Raton, Florida, was formed because of a place called Bibletown. And Bibletown, back before the interstate highway system, people would come down there, and it was the original mega church. And people would have these cottages, and they would rent the cottages for several weeks, and the finest Billy Graham and all the great folks, speakers would come there in the wintertime. And it's now a very, very large operation, and there are deacons, and then there are elders, but at the top of it are 3 trustees who are responsible for that operation. And my brother was one of those trustees. And yet, just unbeknownst to him, he was sued with papers for divorce, and carted off, and then of course it hit the papers, and of course then he had to immediately resign, and then of course on 9 o'clock on Monday morning, because they're 13 and 11 and old enough to look people in the eye and say that's a bunch of nonsense, then they dropped the charges after it had already been, the paper had gone around. And so then my brother was so off balance, and having never dealt with attorneys, he hired an attorney that assured him that he could take care of it, and he didn't know quite what to do. But when the proposal came that alimony should be 40% of his income, and she would get the children most of the time, and all this, and he was like a zombie, and that sounded logical to him. So all right, we'll do that. And then what he didn't realize was that this attorney had 40% of the gross, and they were living off 20% of the gross. So 40% was more than twice as much as they'd ever had to live on. And of course, then you go back in, as you know, to try to make an appeal, and no, there's no reason for that. So they go through everything that he had, sold everything that he had, and eventually it began to be in arrears. This is impossible to make it, and so then he was served with going to jail. And so for month after month after month, he would go in on Friday night, and he and a couple other doctors and some other folks, and they would all check in on Friday evening. He'd take his Bible with him and basically just sit there Saturday and Sunday, and then be released 6 o'clock on Monday morning to go back to his practice. And by the way, his wife had a vision of herself that he saw her as a princess, and she didn't see herself like that. And every effort to make her feel happy was impossible. And so now she lives in a trailer in the Dust Bowl of Colorado with a person that treats her like she's wanted to be treated, as opposed to the mirror opposite of my brother. And and so when you understand the tragedy of there's nothing that could be, you've tried everything that you can, then we have to make sure that what is done is fairness. And that's where you are performing a wonderful service for the many fathers and husbands that do not anticipate and do not understand and are not prepared for it. But it needs to be done. Two more stories and then we'll go to questions and answers. Because what you're doing is that you're discovering that the bureaucracy operates in the dark. The bureaucracy operates when nobody's looking.
The question that I have is, when we're looking at equal shared parenting, should we also be looking at the divorce reform? Because in the situation that you talked about, it was the divorce that was unilaterally imposed upon somebody, and the other injustices that followed, that to me are the big issue. And that actually goes back to Bolshevik Russia and Vladimir Lenin, which we've now imported to the U.S. Could you comment on that?
No, you got it. There's nothing to add. You're 100% correct. And that's it. The family unit and the commitment, and from that everything else flows. And Ronald Reagan said that his no-fault divorce bill was the worst thing that he ever did his entire life. So that sounded noble at the beginning, and we see the consequences of it now, and many of us suffer as a result of it. So you're just correct. I have nothing to add to what you said.
Thank you.